It was just a few weeks before she was going to graduate from high school. It's in the 50s in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her father was a successful banker for Sunoco. He was an oil man banker. Her mother was stay-at-home. She had several siblings, brothers, a sister. Sister was very beautiful. The brothers dated very beautiful women. They were strong and handsome. She came from a beautiful, wonderful family. It was a few weeks before her high school graduation, and suddenly she had a mental breakdown. In her memoir, she says, I don't know what happened. All of a sudden, she just could not function in the world. And the parents didn't know what to do. They found a doctor. Doctor didn't know what to do. So they sent her to a psychiatric hospital where she stayed for 2 years. And while she was there, she suddenly fell into what she called a deep abyss. She was in hell. She started cutting herself. She was suicidal constantly. She had completely lost her mind, she wrote. Now, in our gospel reading, we hear that Jesus speaks, Lazarus, come out, and then he comes out. And in the church, we believe that the Word of God has this generative power. It can create life where there is death. In Genesis, God says, let there be light, and then there is light. And Paul, when he's trying to describe the power of the gospel to the church in Rome, at the center of the empire, he writes that God is someone who can make life. The verb is a compound verb, life and making. Make life out of the corpses. Make life out of corpses. And bring something that has not into being into being. That is who the church says God is. But when you think about this woman suffering this mental breakdown, and you think about people suffering mental illness, and you try to tell them this, it sounds almost cruel. I mean, the church can't be a substitute for a doctor. Like, that's a nice story you tell yourself, and if you believe it, wonderful, but how about for the rest of us? How can you make this idea intellectually coherent to us today, right now? And in our first reading from Wisdom of Solomon, that was actually what he was trying to do. He was writing at a time when Greek ideas were all over the Near East after Alexander the Great. And his task, the writer of the Wisdom of Solomon, was, I am going to try to translate the old Jewish ideas into the idiom of Greek philosophy. So what I want to do this morning, just for a minute, is try to translate this story of Lazarus coming back to life, of God, the Word of God, giving life to someone who has died in a modern, contemporary way that might actually resonate whether you're a believer or not. So let's start with a couple fundamental ideas. Let's start with what we believe church is doing. So our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, our last presiding bishop, whose last day was Thursday of this week, preached a sermon to us, the Diocese of New York, on Friday. And he said that the way you form community in church is through unconditional love. Right? I mean, we have great coffee hour. There are definitely things we should do with name tags. We speak to people we don't know. We're very friendly, right? But he said fundamentally, the way you form community in church is through unconditional love. Now you might say, why? That just sounds like a nice pious idea. Why? That doesn't, okay. And there's another idea. So let's take a second idea. And that is that every relationship you have in your life is fragile until you have conflict. So every relationship you have in your life is fragile or superficial, it's very surfacey, until it is tested by conflict. I think that is probably, we can say, yeah, that makes sense. And so what do we do in the church? We say the church is a place where we are a holding container. We're a holding container where we are going to commit, not necessarily to liking each other, because only God can create that miracle, but to loving each other no matter what. And what that means is that when we're in community and we have conflict, because Guess what, church? We have lots of conflict because we are people gathered in a group. But unlike other groups, we commit to staying together. We say this is a community that has unconditional love. You don't need to be nice to me this morning. I'm still going to be in community with you. It's okay. On Tuesday, if you vote for someone else that I think is a terrible person, I'm still going to be in community with you. Even that, even the threat of democracy, I will still be in community with you. And that is what a healthy church community, what gives it its power. Because we survive these inevitable conflicts. And so when we think about the saints, today's All Saints' Day, all that means is that it is a church community that goes through time. It is not just geographic, like right now. So we are a community that is committed to loving each other and holding this space of unconditional love, so that when we have these conflicts, we are still in community, and therefore our relationships are not superficial, they're deep. And the communion of saints is just, we have this community all through time. All through time. So that's the background, that's church. So how then does this relate to making this ideas sort of that are logical for us today? So the person I was talking about just now is a woman named Marsha Linehan, Dr. Marsha Linehan, and she invented something called DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And so eventually, when she was in this psychiatric hospital, she finally decided after 2 years that she determined, she said, I'm going to get out of this hell. She called it hell. And then my job is going to be to come back into this hell and take everyone else, as many people as I can, out of it. That is going to be my life goal. And so she then studied psychotherapy, behavioral psychology, and finally came upon a techniques through much trial and error, of a way of helping people who are at this level of totally suicidal, that every other therapy cannot work, but that this one, research has shown, evidence-based research has shown that this DBT actually helps people who are at this level of total despair. And one of the elements of DBT is radical acceptance. Radical acceptance. Both for the client, so she teaches the client, yes, bad things happen to you, and you have to accept them. Life goes on. But also for the therapist in the client, you must radically accept them. You want them to get better, of course, but they will not get better until you actually really just accept them for who they are. And as a Christian, I think to myself, the only way that I could possibly do that for someone else is because I know that God has done that for me first. Not because I finally started praying or coming to church. Unconditionally. Before even the foundation of the world, God has loved me like that. And that gives me new life. So Marsha wrote that when she teaches therapists dealing with suicidal clients, she tries to describe what it's like to be on the inside of that mindset. And she said, hell, when you're there, it's like you're in a small room, windowless. You can't find any escape. You're just looking for that door, but you can't find any escape. That sounds to me like Lazarus' tomb. So there you are, in this windowless room, totally despairing, thinking ending my life is actually better than keeping my life. You are a corpse. You have died. And then, suddenly you feel, or you hear, or you learn that there is a God who loves you no matter what, accepts you unconditionally. And then suddenly, the room gets brighter. And the stone is being pushed open. And instead of being in a small, windowless room where you feel you have no options, you step out into a sunlit world full of possibility.